Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. Tottenham Hotspur got the job done in Bilbao. So what does the trophy mean for Spurs and Postecoglou? And where does defeat leave Ruben Amorim and Manchester United? Right, here with us today, all the way out in Bilbao, we have our Tottenham Hotspur correspondent, Jack Pitt-Brooke, and Manchester United correspondent, Laurie Whitwell. Gents, really appreciate you joining us. I doubt either of you have had much sleep, but Jack, Tottenham's 17-year trophy drought is actually over. That sounds so surreal. Is this the dawning, though, of a new age for them now?
Yeah, it does sound it felt very surreal watching it. It felt very surreal watching the celebrations as soon as the final whistle went. Richarlison running around with his head twirled around Richarlison running around with his shirt twirled around his head, not his head twirled around his shirt. That doesn't really make sense. Vicario
That's lack of sleep, I completely understand, mate.
Vicario collapsing in tears, all the players jumping on each other and so on. It was a truly amazing moment. I think everyone associated with Tottenham who was there to witness it will feel very grateful to have been there, because this has been such a quest for them. It's not just they haven't won a final since 2008, they haven't scored in a final since 2008. Every fan I spoke to said even just a goal in this final would at least give us a moment to take home with us. And they got all that and more at the final whistle. I mean, what it means for a new age of Spurs, I mean, we don't even know who the manager's going to be for next season at this point. And I think their league form shows that there's still an awful lot of work to be done. But I think at the moment, it's the night itself, the occasion, the moment, the celebrations, those are the things that people are really treasuring.
Yeah, the pictures. I've been sent loads of videos and pictures from loads of Spurs fans. Sadly, Laurie, not so many from Manchester United fans. That this was a big chance, wasn't it, to salvage the season? Actually, for both teams, it was a big chance to salvage the season. But, you guys recorded a Talk of the Devils immediately after the game last night. I can't imagine there was much optimism at the end of it.
No, it was very despondent. And, yeah, as you say, the sort of ramifications for both United and Spurs were clear, and that jeopardy made it a much more intriguing final. Now the actual football on display didn't really capture the imagination. I think it kind of lived down to expectations. Spurs had a game plan, didn't they, where once they got the goal, they would sit deep and just sort of clear the ball. Romero was in chief villain mode on the wind up, and certainly Harry Maguire took issue with that after the final whistle. But yeah, the kind of overall picture for United is a bleak one, because it does change the finances hugely. It alters what they could probably do in the transfer market and who would be attracted by the club, even though it does have this great stature and heritage. The current position, 16th in the Premier League and no European football to offer, with a manager who's still trying to implement his style of play, and clearly there are issues with it, as we saw last night. So yeah, I think this would have been a kind of get out of jail free card for United, a plaster over a wound. But as it happens, that the wound is still very much open and scarred, and so I think that is going to take some time to get through and get over for United.
Laurie, it's fair to say, I think regardless of Bruno Fernandes' form coming into this match, I think it's 19 goals and 19 assists this season, Spurs seem to have nullified him. Bruno Fernandes, in the first half, Ollie Kay points out on the Athletic Live blog, only completed 11 first half passes, with one of his 4 incompleted ones, the one that Sarr intercepted prior to the Johnson goal.
Well, he actually made 2 bad passes in that passage, because he tried a crossfield pass that got intercepted, then Casemiro sort of won it back and gave it back to Fernandes, and then he tried a small ball back again, and Sarr intercepted and drove on. Yeah, he was fantastic for Spurs, obviously putting the cross then for that move that Tottenham scored from. But it just felt like Fernandes didn't quite have the right gear about him. He sort of was making curious choices and then not executing them correctly. So even that pass that gets intercepted, you're sort of wondering why he's trying that. It sort of seemed the wrong way to move the ball. So yeah, real disappointing night for him, because I think a lot of United fans had put stock in him being the guy that could drive them on, and this being the moment that he'd finally win a European trophy with United and kind of get that confirmation of his status as a cult figure, bordering on a legend for United, and it just did not happen at all. And So yeah, I mean, what that means for his position as well. Some interesting quotes from him after the game in terms of looking at his own future, and if the club want me to go, then maybe that'll be the course of action, which was sort of the similar notes that he was striking last summer. But ultimately, he then had talks, was convinced to sign a new deal. Not that much longer an extension actually, but just a sort of rubber stamping of perhaps his salary and the fact that he wanted to continue. But that offer from Al Hilal is there. It is genuine. In terms of the transfer fee, you got United probably thinking, well, that's 80 odd million for a 30-year-old that maybe we do need to reinvest. I mean, I think it would be a big call, obviously, if he was to leave. He's such an integral part of this United side. Okay, he's not perfect, but I feel like he has driven the side on numerous times this season, and that would be a huge departure to change things around. But clearly, a lot of players now, I think, will have these kind of decisions to make.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that a little later on. Jack, a lot was made into this match about, I guess, how much more robust the Spurs midfield would be, losing players like Kulusevski, Maddison, for instance, that they lacked creativity, but seemed to be a different type of midfield. How do you think they coped in this match? Because some might say perhaps they actually did the job, overpowered Manchester United. Yves Bissouma, Bentancur did their job.
Yeah, I think that the absences of Spurs' most talented midfielders, Maddison, Kulusevski and Bergvall, it wasn't as much of a blow as it might have looked, because Tottenham haven't really played possession football for the last few rounds of this competition. They've played, what some people, to a lot of people, it looks like kind of Jose ball. They're happy to sit deep. They don't even want the ball. They'll go long if they have to. They'll waste time if they have to. They're incredibly ruthless. They're very efficient. They've basically turned everything that we thought we knew about Ange Ball on its head over the course of this campaign. So, yeah, of course they miss having their best creative players, but they're not really trying to create that much if you watch them play at the moment. And so I think it's completely built on having Bissouma and Bentancur sitting in front of the back four, protecting, both of whom I think have been brilliant in the last few European games. Bissouma especially, because he started the season so badly. He looked like he was kind of done at Tottenham, but he's been absolutely heroic for the last few of these matches and was brilliant again last night. And so, but if that's how you're going to play, I mean, Pat Matasar I thought worked really, really hard last night. Great running without the ball, good cross, a dangerous cross which led to the only goal of the game. And so I think given that, Kulusevski, who I think would have played otherwise, wasn't really looking fully fit before his knee injury, and given how they wanted to play, I actually think that the personnel they had on the pitch were fully appropriate for the plan that Postecoglou had for the team.
Yeah, for sure. We have to talk about Brennan Johnson, Jack, and, what a pivotal moment this was for him. And, if you remember earlier on in the season, him having to turn his social media off after lots of abuse from fans in particular, him scoring, well, still debatable, the winning goal to bring a trophy back to this club. I mean, that was pivotal, surely.
Yeah, I still can't really work out how the ball went in.
Neither can I. I've looked at it several times. Is it Luke Shaw?
A lot of people have said to me that Luke Shaw handballed it in. I don't even know if that's true or not. I've not seen sufficiently good replays. But I think it was all but look, it's fitting that a game this poor should be settled by a goal this ugly. It would have felt wrong, I think, if somebody had scored a screamer or beat 10 players and put it in the bottom corner, or a brilliant team move. It would have been jarring. It wouldn't have been right. But I do think that Johnson's contribution to that goal is just making that, that kind of poacher's run, trying to get in front of a defender, trying to just get on the end of a cross. And that's really what we've seen from him all season. He's a strange player, Johnson, because he's not a winger who beats people really, or a winger who takes people on 1v1, but he's brilliant at getting on the end of things, and he's brilliant at making that little dart into the box. And even though yesterday wasn't exactly a clean finish by anyone's standards, it was definitely the most important goal that he's ever contributed to.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, also Van der Ven's goal line clearance, Vicario's save, all signs were sort of pointing to Spurs taking that, especially in the latter part of the game. Right, Laurie, you pointed out in the Athletics coverage how Harry Maguire had said pre-match he didn't want to be resorting to being thrown up front. I mean, that's precisely what happened. I mean, United were so desperate. They threw everything at it. I said the last 10, 15 minutes of that match, but it wasn't to be.
No, and this is something that I think is a fascinating point to pull out, because ultimately Amorim still was in that sort of 3-4-2-1 system, and Maguire was the centre forward, and Xerxes then dropped to number 10, and it was shuffling things around rather than changing the formation to really go attacking and just try and get men in the box. There were times when they got 4 or 5 men in, and that's where Luke Shaw got his header. He burst in late, and Vicario pulled off a really good save, but it wasn't sort of something that happened by design repeatedly, which it could have done because Spurs were sat back. So I think that's something that Amorim will have to address. He said he won't change his approach. This is his idea, and he'll keep going with it. But I feel like that felt like it was slipping away from United, even though they were sort of having some okay moments in the second half. But so that's something that I think Sir Alex Ferguson used to chuck a load of guys on and change formation a bit towards the end of games, and obviously even Erik ten Hag did it away against Liverpool in the FA Cup last season. And this is something that I just wanted to kind of touch on with Jack, actually, because you mentioned Spurs changing their approach to the Europa League. I sort of wondered if that's a freedom that Postecoglou had from his philosophy, from his approach, the high line, because he perhaps felt that he was going to be departing at the end of this season anyway. Amorim maybe has to stick to his principles because he thinks if he changes them now and he's still the manager, then the players will just disrespect him. But how much do you think that the Spurs approach was down to Postecoglou? How much perhaps the players putting their input into it, because it is such a huge departure from Postecoglou saying this is who we are in terms of that high line to now this picture of Tottenham. And I wonder how much Amorim can draw from that, if anything at all.
So I think that it's a really interesting question, that, and something that we've been wondering about quite a lot. But so the way that Postecoglou sells it, of course, is he's not going to say, "Oh, I gave up on my philosophy because I realised it wasn't going to win." He says, "Well, he said to me, like, I asked him about this in the press conference last night, actually, and he said, I've always adapted in knockout football. I've always known that knockout football is different. It requires different skills, different game plans, and I totally get that. I do think that the kind of night and day difference between what people might call Ange ball and the way they've won this tournament is so stark that I think partly it's to do with, he admitted this last night, like ever since January, which I think when it was clear their Premier League season was just totally sunk, that they prioritised Europe. I also think that I do wonder in part whether all the speculation around his future has almost made him even more ruthless, made him even more efficient, because he probably thinks, well, I have to, I can still win this trophy for the sake of my legacy, but also I don't really need to keep building the foundations for next season. If you're not going to be there next season, you don't need to institute a long-term plan anymore. It's almost like if you're going to get sacked, you almost become akin to a manager on a short-term deal. Like a kind of, I don't know, Gus Hiddink winning the FA Cup with Chelsea in 2009, or Di Matteo Champions League 2012, that kind of scenario where it's literally just about the trophy a few months ahead of you and doing everything you can to get there.
Yeah, on a lighter note, Jack, am I right in thinking there weren't enough UEFA medals to go around for the Spurs team? What's this? I only just found this out before we started recording the pod. Did Sonny actually get his medal in the end?
Yeah, so I think the problem is that obviously, like, ultimately everyone gets a medal, but there's only so many medals at the podium. And I think Tottenham, I think from memory, Tottenham sent up like a lot of young players and fringe players who were not, were a long way from being in the match day squad. And then, so that means that by the time all the, the fringe players, and of course you've got staff as well, have gone and got their medal from Ceferin. And then when Son is obviously going to lift the trophy because he's a club captain, by the time he gets up there, all the medals have been given out. Although I'm pretty sure I saw a photo of Son with a medal. I would be really surprised if Son doesn't fly home. I think Spurs are flying home in the next hour or two. If Son is flying home without a medal, I would be very surprised. He might have to borrow one of somebody else. have a kind of medal share.
They get 50, so he should have a medal.
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, you guys would have seen it, but he made a joke on TNT Sports, the broadcaster over here, saying maybe I might not just make my flight tomorrow. Who knows? Because I've been celebrating so much. But I hope he definitely is on that plane. Right. Next, we'll ask what this trophy means for Spurs boss Ange Postecoglou. Jack, he backed himself and actually he prophesized it. Here he is, second season. He's won a trophy. He kept to his word. Absolute mastermind, surely.
Yeah, incredible. I was thinking, I've been thinking a lot, like, to have said, obviously he said that a long time ago, and it's been used a bit of a stick to beat him with ever since. And I think there's always been a bit of a subtext, which is, if you don't win that trophy, you're going to look very silly. And so for him to actually do it, for him to not just win Tottenham's first trophy in 17 years, first European trophy in 41 years, but to also back up those words, the words that I think a lot of people like to think were a kind of arrogant boast of his. I think seeing him with the trophy at the end, I just thought he must be feeling a level of vindication and satisfaction never registered in human beings before, because he has in fact delivered on that. We saw at the end, like, Reguilon and Maddison, neither of whom played. I don't know if they made the banner, I imagine probably not, but they were carrying around this huge banner, which is a picture of Postecoglou's face with those, like, Photoshop shades, holding a Photoshop Europa League.
Is that how you
look
look
exactly.
at it? Yeah.
Saying, I think it was something like, I always win trophies in my second season, mate. And so Postecoglou didn't even need to say it, because he had Reguilon and Maddison holding up that banner for him.
Yeah, do you know, I was thinking about this when this clip's obviously been doing the rounds this morning. And I wonder, and maybe it's just me, I was just thinking, if this was Jose Mourinho back in the day saying, I always win a second trophy, a trophy in my second year, I don't think we'd have batted an eyelid. Do you think he suffered from being a bit of an outsider, Jack, in terms of, Australian guy trying to coach in the Premier League and people questioning his tactics and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I do. I think that he's obviously come in with a very different CV from what you would normally get of a manager of a Big Six club. If you look at recent Tottenham appointments, Conte had won the Premier League with Chelsea. Mourinho had won the Premier League with Chelsea twice. They both won things all around the world. Mourinho's won 2 Champions Leagues and all the rest of it. And now Postecoglou has won an awful lot. He's won with various different, I think he's won with 3 different teams in Australia. I think he's won with Yokohama Marinos in Japan. He got Australia to a World Cup. But, won a domestic treble with Celtic and won the title in his first season as well. So he has succeeded everywhere he's been. But I think because we are generally in this country of the opinion that if you want to manage a Big Six team, you need to succeed in one of Europe's Big 5 leagues, really. It does feel a bit it just does feel very unusual. I feel like he's almost being judged by a different standard. And therefore, I think, and he clearly thinks this because he brings it up quite a lot. Like he is.
Well, that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, like
he spoke about not having any leg ups and things like that.
He mentioned
right?
it yesterday. I think he said, because a lot of my achievements are on the other side of the world, people think they don't really count as much. But I think that it's because of the sort of varied global CV he has that I think that kind of like second season trophy thing has become almost like a stick to beat him with, because there's an unspoken implication here, which is that you might win in your second season in Scotland or Australia or Japan, but winning in your second season in England is different, and that's always been the unspoken implication there.
Yeah, I mean, Laurie, when Erik ten Hag wins couple of cups actually for Manchester United, and you're thinking, is he going to stay? Is he going to go? He ends up staying. I mean, there's a lesson here, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, that on reflection went wrong for United, sort of sticking with the guy, but they'd undermined him, right? So I think that was always going to be a difficult thing for him to come through and progress beyond. The structure at United at that point was developing, was, sort of emerging. It was new people getting to know each other, and did they feel totally confident in making such a big call to change manager and appoint a new one at that particular moment? Whereas at Spurs, obviously, you've got Daniel Levy there at the head of the club, who has been that consistent for a couple of decades, right? And so he I'm sure will have come to terms with it in his own mind, and now it's kind of all on him, really. I suppose, does he change his mind or not? And so Yeah, I think, as Jack says, though, it's a different thing, isn't it, when you actually see a guy with a trophy, and particularly when it's been one that, for a club like Tottenham, they haven't had all that often. 2008, right, last trophy, and you have to go even further back for a European trophy. So it'll stand in history, that, and so does that colour what you then do with the person who's won it. So, yeah, it clearly, thinking back to the United scenario, it was a crazy situation. I suppose you haven't had that with Spurs, where there's not been these links with managers where they've obviously been speaking to them directly. Maybe there's been conversations behind the scenes, but with United last year, it was so public. So many people were spoken to, and it just leaked out all over the place. And I think that really did damage Ten Hag's status, even though they tried to change his coaching staff and back him in the transfer market to give him that kind of reputation. I think ultimately it was doomed to failure. So at least you haven't had that, I don't think, too much with Tottenham, although I know Jack's reported in The Athletic about different people that they're looking at. So yeah, it will be really fascinating to see what happens. There's obviously a big team party at the Spurs hotel last night where they're all sort of singing his name, I'm told, and to Jack's point, having that banner out on the pitch, I think that's quite big, right? Having players sort of that are demonstrably showing support for the manager. So yeah, I'll be intrigued watching it, given the similarity to the United's perspective.
Yeah, Brennan Johnson made a really interesting comment at the end of the match. I was talking to the on-pitch reporter here, Jack, and he spoke about, this could be a perfect mic drop moment for Postecoglou when they asked him about the manager's future. We've spoken about it on the pod, how there is buy-in in the dressing room, and I can imagine definitely buy-in in the Europa League. But, if he leaves, how do you think that those in the dressing room would feel about Postecoglou? Because, look, the league form hasn't been great, and he's been very honest, Postecoglou, and said, I'll take that on, mate.
Yeah, I definitely think the players, there's a real bond between Postecoglou and the players, and I think that you can see that from the way that Postecoglou really convinced them that they could win the Europa League. He convinced them they could win the Europa League by playing a different way. He basically persuaded them to become a different team in the last few months, and it's been so different watching the way they've really got their way through every round that they faced in this competition. And that gratitude, that warmth, that trust, that respect is only going to be heightened by the fact they've now got a medal around their necks, which they didn't have before. That all said, football's a pretty cold place sometimes, and I'm sure that if it is club announcement, thank you Ange, on Monday, and then a new manager comes in, then I'm sure they'll all show up for pre-season, raring to go and looking forward to the Champions League, because everybody knows that football does move on really fast. And people are always looking forward to whatever the next challenge is. That's just the nature of the industry. And frankly, nobody knows that about the football industry better than Postecoglou himself.
Yeah, I don't want to rub it in, Laurie, but, Tottenham Hotspur now have Champions League football. Manchester United sadly do not, But then you look at teams like Newcastle, Aston Villa, Crystal Palace and Forest, who also have European football next season. Just how big is this job at hand for Manchester United?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think, in a counterpoint to Postecoglou, Amorim's reputation, this could have given him that boost, that platform to inspire belief in his players. There was some strong comments afterwards, actually, from Luke Shaw and Diogo Dalot, who said 100% he is the guy to lead us. Even Bruno Fernandes, amid his kind of questions about his own future, was gave backing to Amorim. And okay, players backing manager is nothing new, particularly when they can see that's the way the wind is blowing from the executives. But it did strike me, just how strong they were, and certainly I don't know if that's absolutely the case across the board. Certainly Alejandro Garnacho had some kind of pointed words to say, and there was other Instagram posts from family members that suggested that he was very, very disappointed to miss out on starting the match, and certainly some of the stuff that Amorim said publicly about being the worst team in history, I don't think that went down well. So that's some, that might have repercussions in the summer. But I think that I kind of didn't really fully answer your point on Maguire going up top, did I really, Ayo? But that kind of thing, I think, is awkward for a manager. If you kind of having to repeatedly go to that well of putting a centre back up top. Now, okay, it might actually be a a strategic move, given his aerial ability, and clearly he scored, against Lyon, that dramatic goal. He scored at Stamford Bridge, although it was ruled out for offside. So I can see the logic, but it's just a bad look, isn't it? And he might say, well, listen, I haven't got the players to actually then change things up. So you've got Højlund, who, obviously struggling for form, isn't really, I don't think, that kind of, that muscular physical presence that it seems Amorim likes up front. And then Xerxes is the alternative, and he was only just coming back from an injury, and he's kind of more of a 10, 9.5. I think United are still trying to figure out exactly what role he is anyway. So maybe he's just like, well, this is the squad I've got, so I have to put a centre back up top, and we can't really judge him fairly on that. But it does then emphasise just how important this summer market is, and there are still questions. Do these people that are in charge now really have the absolute credentials, and will they get it right? It's a question that I think we are fair in asking.
There's another conversation here, another narrative that sort of signifies that Manchester United not having European football, those extra matches, gives Ruben Amorim a bit more time to actually, hopefully, get some players in that suit his style and actually work with these players to get his ideas and tactics in form. So actually, by the time they are ready to graduate into the big leagues again, they are a ready team.
I mean, that is the silver lining, right? It's obviously then got to be acted on and has got to show benefit. That was something that he mentioned before the game. Was it a psychological tactic to alleviate a bit of pressure? Was it his genuinely held belief? I think probably the latter, to be honest, because he's been pretty brutally honest with a lot of what he's said, and not all of it has been, the kind of sort of strength that you'd expect from a manager to speak. He's shown vulnerability. So I think he was being honest in the sense of, actually, I would really love to have more time on the training pitches coaching these guys. I mean, United will have 38 Premier League games, and then a couple of cup matches to start off with. If they go out early in those competitions, they could have 40 matches next season, which is obviously leaves so much time to attempt to get your style of play across to these players. But yeah, I think ultimately United obviously would have preferred to have the revenue that the kind of standing in football's ladder to that European football brings. But I think that is probably a genuinely held belief by him, that actually I could do something on the training pitch with these guys without having the kind of difficulties of midweek action.
Jack, from the outside looking in, how convinced have you been with Amorim, considering he took over this club in November?
Well, it's impossible to be convinced when you watch them play. Like, he's a really, I find him to be a very interesting and persuasive talker, and I kind of quite, in theory, I admire his sort of absolutely blinkered commitment to his style of play. I guess the problem is that, there's a reason that Liverpool didn't go for him last year, and it's because if you want to play, if you're committed to playing 3-4-3, whatever happens, you need a squad calibrated to that purpose. And I think the United squad is very bad, regardless of what formation they're trying to play. But trying to get them to play a formation that's unfamiliar to them makes them look even worse. And you watch them play and you think the only way that they can even start to get better is with hundreds of millions of pounds that they don't have. They need so many new players who can play Amorim's system, but I don't even see how they get there. So no, I mean, it's impossible I like elements of him, but it's just impossible to have any reasons for optimism that he can turn it around.
Ollie Kay, on a blog post while the match was going on, actually said something that I thought was really fascinating. Not that I was surprised by it, but it made it seem a bit more stark. He says, I spoke to a contact at the club back in February who told me it was imperative that they won the Europa League, not because it was important to win a trophy, but in order to secure Champions League qualification, because the financial situation was, he puts it in quotes, a lot worse than people outside the club realise. Just how damaging is this for Manchester United on a financial basis and also on a commercial basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think you sort of quote some numbers there in terms of what it means for Tottenham. I feel like it might even be more for United just because of the commercial revenue and the matchday revenue that they can get, although I know Tottenham get a big matchday revenue now as well with their stadium. But, I mean, for example, United have a clause in their Adidas contract that's £90 million a year that gets reduced by 10 million for each year that they're not in the Champions League. So this is the first season that comes into effect. It used to be that the old deal was sort of every, if they made the Champions League, if they failed to for 2 consecutive years, that it would be hit, and they ended up always sort of just about escaping that. And this is, again, they're going to be not in the Champions League for 2 years in a row, but that's by the by. That's this Adidas deal that I think is significant. They've still not got a training ground shirt sponsor. Will that impact what they're able to do there? But yeah, from a purely sort of financial prize money point of view, from a broadcast revenue point of view, from a match day income point of view, the lower number of matches is huge. I think they make about £1.5 million per match. So, take off, say 10 home matches. I think that's what they ultimately, something like they had this year. That would then, obviously be a significant deficit. I mean, they are obviously trying to pick through the bones of the Glazer regime, which did generate cash. They were paying dividends to the shareholders, aka the Glazers, for a few seasons when they were having a surplus, and obviously that was a bitter pill for a lot of fans to swallow, to see the people that had loaded debt onto the club then make even more money out of it. But then their mismanagement of the club past that point, where they've overcommitted on spending for players, chasing that dream to get back into the Champions League, to potentially beef up the club to make it look more appealing for an investor. So, for example, Anthony and Casemiro, those were deals struck when United were looking like they were going to have a disastrous season under Erik ten Hag when he first joined, and that was at the same time that they were then going to put the club on the market, and ultimately that led to Sir Jim Ratcliffe's investment. And they have ultimately lost sort of 300 million in recent years, United. So that's a huge gap to try and build a bridge over, and Ratcliffe has taken the choice to cut staff levels, reduce the commercial team, which have got these deals in the first place. The Adidas one, or the Snapdragon, the shirt sponsor that they've got, that was a big deal for United at the time. The people that made those deals have gone. So are the people that have replacing them going to be able to kind of pull in that kind of money? That's a big ask on them now, when they haven't got the allure of Champions League football to sell. So yeah, I think it is a pretty bleak picture for United from a financial point of view. Ultimately, it comes down to 11 players on a pitch on a weekend now. There's no midweeks, plus the players on the bench and that first team level to try and arrest this, and maybe that togetherness can change things. I mean, look at what happened to Chelsea, to your earlier point, Ayo, when they didn't have European competition under Antonio Conte. I think that would be a big ask for United to make that kind of turnaround. But, they need to be focusing now on themselves. They can't be thinking, well, we're in a desperate situation, so we can just sort of make that our excuse. They have to look within and try and make the best of this solution. But I do agree. I think it's a pretty difficult financial situation to get through.
Yeah, okay, Jack, I know you're probably going to have to head back to London at some point, but I hope you make it in time for the parade on Friday. Do you reckon you're going to make it in time, mate?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I hope to be back in London late tonight. I actually have.
Okay, fine.
I actually have to go to the Thomas Tuchel squad announcement press conference at Wembley on Friday.
Wow.
So I don't know if I will be at the parade, but I feel like I've seen the celebrations now. I mean, being in the stadium was a special moment, but I think I think the parade will be great for everyone who goes, and I hope they will have a great time. But having seen them lift the trophy, I feel like I don't have the same emotional need to be at the parade.
Laurie, Jack, thank you so much for your insight. Really appreciate you joining us so early in the morning after very little sleep. And also thank you guys for watching as well. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And also leave us a cheeky comment as well. That is it from now. We'll be back soon. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.